Welcome to Cartoonist Kayfabe. My name is Ed Piskor, and the videos that you get to see are brought to you by the books that we make. In stores now is Red Room Trigger Warnings, trade paperback, goes along beautifully next to the Antisocial Network, Red Room trade paperback, Murder on the Dark Web for Fun and Profit. Every story is self-contained. Each book has 4 stories. Each book is self-contained. Scoop these up, man. You can hit my link tree in the description below this video to get your hands on current and future Red Room comics. Hulk, Grand Design, Monster, and Madness are in stores right now, and it's going to be getting the Treasury Edition treatment in the early part of 2023. And Jimmy has Street Angel, Deadliest Girl Alive. Trade paperback is back in stores now in a new reprint. Get your hands on those comics and support the channel. Also, speaking of supporting the channel, we receive tons of mail, and we get some real choice pieces from the audience out there. One of these pieces that just came in to the studio is this fine book right here, man. Sphinx Comics, which is the production company that created the documentary Comic Book Confidential, for my peer group, an extremely important documentary from the mid-late 1980s that you will hear time and time again people refer to. This was a documentary that I saw on regular television. It might have been A&E. That was the station that played this thing. And just flicking through this channels, saw Spider-Man on the screen, and you could not take for granted seeing Spider-Man on the screen at that time, man. Stopped dead in my tracks. Somehow I knew it was Stan Lee's voice over top of it, and directly after the Stan Lee portion of this documentary, you jump right into Robert Crumb and the Underground, man. So this piece right here, shouts to Cal Johnston from Halifax, Nova Scotia. He runs a shop called Strange Adventures. There's a handful of these shops in Nova Scotia. If you're ever in town, you got to go check these stores out, man. I found some really incredible comics there, and am so thrilled that he sent this our way. I have no idea the exact dissemination of this comic. It says free. What I'm imagining is Ron Mann was doing a tour circuit for Comic Book Confidential, and he had these to give people at the door as a kind of introduction or as a party favor or something to go along with the film screening. You could see the whole crew that went into putting the documentary together, and basically it's a pretty nuts and bolts history of comics up to a certain point, man. When 1986 rolls around and there's that new resurgence and Dark Knight comes out and Watchmen comes out, there is a brand new buzz regarding the medium. There's some bona fide hits that stand the test of time. Watchmen on a Time magazine's top 100 novels of the 20th century. So it's a big deal. A lot of eyeballs on comics at that point in time. Very cool to see that Ron Mann and crew, they stuck to the U.S. model whenever they were discussing comics in Comic Book Confidential. Pretty sure it's a Canadian production company, but with this piece right here, Ron Mann and crew are able to celebrate some Canadian cartoonists with this Chester Brown cover and single-page promo piece. And for the duration of the comic, pretty much you just get into a kind of introduction into the players that are going to be in the documentary, the people that you can expect to see in the documentary. And this reminded me that early in the Kayfabe channel, Jimmy and I recorded an audio commentary track that can be synced up with Comic Book Confidential. And what I'm going to do once we cut out here for this once we cut out here from looking at this magazine, we'll segue right into that audio commentary. Jimmy and I will let you know when to unpause your video, get your Comic Book Confidential DVDs or MPEGs or however you feel like watching it. Put it on pause as soon as you turn it on, and we will tell you when to unpause and enjoy the commentary track, because we recorded that thing when we might have had 3,000 subscribers. So the channel has grown substantially. There's been well over 1,000 videos that came after we put that commentary track out there. So because the commentary might be buried, I have interest in doing more commentary tracks with Jimmy and perhaps Tom also. I want to see if the new subscriber base would be interested in such commentary, and you could test the waters with us with the Comic Book Confidential audio commentary track that we'll be playing right after this. Once again, I want to give shouts to Cal Johnston and the good people at Strange Adventures Comic Shop in Halifax, Nova Scotia. They hosted us and were very gracious, treated us extremely well. It was some of our last travels before COVID, and Cal continues to support the channel by sending us some very, very cool comic book artifacts like this Comic Book Confidential piece. Before we cut out of here, once again, I want to let you guys know, man, these are our comics. Please support our comics. Helps keep the channel going, helps keep us in our drawing chairs so that we can continue making comics our own. And without further ado, let's cut to the Comic Book Confidential audio commentary track by me and Jimmy, recorded probably late 2018, super early 2019. Check it out, and if you want us to do future commentary tracks, if you're interested in such a thing, let us know what videos you want to hear us speak on top of, man. I'm thinking about Masters of Comic Book Art, the one that is hosted by Harlan Ellison, maybe the Crumb documentary. Let us know in the comments below, and enjoy the commentary track for Comic Book Confidential. What do you say, Jimmy? Without further ado, can we hit the play button on this?
Yeah, I'll give a countdown for the listeners at home. So 3, 2, 1, play.
And we open up the film with this guy. His name is Paul Coates, and this program was called Confidential File, ran from 1953 to 1959. And this douchebag, he was like, think of a predecessor to like Wally George or like a Rush Limbaugh, conservative guy, right? So some of the titles of some of these shows, if I may, some of the titles for other shows on this program: Quack Psychology, Daytime Whites, about light-skinned black people who pass themselves off as white people to try to get more opportunity in the 1950s America, and then several episodes about homosexuals. And I quote, homosexuals and the problems they present, homosexuals who stalk and molest children, and one of the last episodes of Confidential File, are homosexuals criminals?
Wow.
So you see that this was a very McCarthy-era program. And now we see, this is Paul Mavrides. Like in the credits, we see his name, and until yesterday, I was perplexed. I was wondering where the heck his contribution was in the flick. And then I popped his name into the old Google machine, saw a photo of him. He's clearly this guy right here with that blunt in his mouth at the drawing table.
It's such a great opening, him actually drawing. There's something captivating, I think, about watching somebody draw. There's that great Japanese documentary series, Manben, where you're just seeing footage of people actually drawing. And when I first became aware of this movie, you see the great movie poster that has all the cartoonist names and then a little image in their styles. And I just assumed they were pulling clips and samples from all of these cartoonists because he nails all these different styles so well.
I wonder if he really drew this stuff. You know, I mean, it's so perfect. But then I look at the wobbliness on that Spider-Man and I'm like, Ditko would have been tighter. And of course, that's his contribution, the Church of the Subgenius, Bob Daub, or whatever that guy's name is. Let me ask you this, Jimmy. Did you ever fall victim to the tragedy that occurs at the end of this opening?
Yeah, I was thinking of that too. I think every artist has had an experience of this sort. I keep my ink now taped in a holder on my drawing table. I'm not knocking my inkwell over again. Heartbreaking.
One thing I like a lot about this documentary is the music. I like the limited animation that they pull off.
Yeah, I don't want to get too much about our YouTube channel, but there are edits in the way they present some of the comic books that I intend to steal. Very simple, but it looks great. Like, that was a big takeaway for me on this.
There's Bill Gaines, man, in living color. As soon as I saw this, I immediately knew that was Bill Gaines because I was a Mad magazine reader when I was a little kid, and there was a strip called The Lighter Side of by Dave Berg, I think is the cartoonist name, and Dave Berg would draw this guy as a character in the Lighter Side of every month. So I'm like, okay, that's Bill, and he has his Russ Cockrum EC hardcovers in the back there.
See, that was a great open in the perfectly centered 10-cent square. I love seeing any of this vintage footage. So, like, seeing his office is amazing. I did not realize the role his dad played in creating the format of the comic book. Unbelievable. It
is unbelievable. And, you know, he was, Max Gaines was associated with Jack Leibowitz and those guys. Like I'm not 100% sure how it shook out, but he gets some credit on early national publications. Like, he was associated with the guys who would ultimately become DC Comics.
Oh, that's interesting. There's that great book, Men of Tomorrow, that's about the early couple decades of DC Comics. I'm sure there's some information about that in that book.
Like, this limited animation. Tell me that's not awesome, man. And then, of course, Bill Gaines, he became publisher of educational comics after his poor father suffered a death in a boating accident. Oh, look at these photos, man. That guy with the pipe is Bill Everett. That's young Will Eisner at the top there in that diamond. And then Siegel and Schuster on the right there. I know this goddamn movie verbatim. I've seen it that many times, man.
It's incredible how the superhero shows up and basically launches the comic book format.
What he says about says about Babe Ruth and baseball, and by he I mean William Gaines. Right. What he says about Babe Ruth and baseball and what Milton Berle did for TV made me want to like investigate. Like, well, what did those guys do for TV? But then, obviously, Superman was such a big hit, and the superhero, you know, is immediately on the forefront of that from that point forward, until it's not. And that's something that a lot of people will discover with this documentary, that the superhero petered out for a while.
So Will Eisner here.
I wonder if that's Eisner Iger Studios in that photograph right there.
It must be, right?
It must be, but I see 3 or 4... No, I see actually 5 women in that photo, and I never see any female credits in the old spirits that kitchen sink put out, and there's usually a pretty healthy... a healthy dissection on who did what on these strips, but I never see a woman's name in there. So
it's so great seeing all these guys.
Jack the King. That's the unfortunate thing. When this flick came out and when it was on TV, like 100% of these people were still with us when I saw them. And Ron Mann said in an article that Kirby at this point was not very lucid. He was very forgetful, and he actually had to do several interviews with Jack to just get some salvageable material for the documentary. Some Simon and Kirby right there. I always liked the tandem of Simon and Kirby.
We're so lucky that Ron Mann made this documentary because these guys just weren't being filmed. You know, there's no record of a lot of old cartoonists for that reason, and he talks about that outside of the film, is some of these people, it's the first time they were being filmed.
Jack Kirby reading bits from Captain America #1, Be Still My Heart. Oh, man. This brings back some memories. So, like, after seeing this documentary, man, it put me on the hunt to just try to find some of this work. And I immediately ran to the library. Like, if I watch this flick on a Friday, like I went to the library that Saturday morning and picked up comics by Les Daniels. And it is a perfect companion piece to this film because there's even Simon and Kirby Captain America comics that are in, you know, the full complete stories are in that book. So if you Kayfabers at home, if you dig Comic Book Confidential, you should also check out the comics by Les Daniels. It's a perfect companion piece for this.
It's funny, this excerpt that they read, because it's essentially like drugs, just making...
Yeah, steroids.
Yeah. Super soldiers. It's a different perspective now.
Shit, man. It's probably the precursor to it. Like, you know how like the tricorders and stuff are the predecessor to like iPhone or whatever? Like, maybe Captain America was a predecessor to the anabolic steroid.
I just heard someone on a podcast mention steroids coming out of, I don't know if it was World War II, but that was it. They were like developed for, use on soldiers and recovery and things. I love all of this stuff too. So seeing these comics, I never see stuff like this. Occasionally a book will feature maybe one of these characters or series, but to see like all the different titles and what they look like.
Titles you've never heard of.
Right. Amazing logos, bright colors, weird looking characters. It's incredible.
Oh, Will. He was probably still teaching at School of Visual Arts when this film was being shot. Probably Comics and Sequential Art probably came out within a year, either before or after this film. So at some level, he was an educator at this moment.
I love this shot, and I was thinking about the size of this shot in real life. Like if you had the comic book, like these, how big is that in a comic book?
Yeah,
it's an inch and a half square, 2-inch square. Like these tiny little panels, and they're so cinematic.
And of course, the strip that Will was reading right there was the sans serif story that inspired Frank Miller's Elektra character, Elektra and Daredevil tandem. The way like my trajectory into comics fandom or whatever, it came by way of Rob Liefeld and Todd McFarlane. I see Frank Miller's name mentioned in interviews all the time when I would read interviews with Todd and Rob, and I became a Frank Miller fan. And then I read Frank Miller interviews all over the place, and he's pointing me to Will Eisner. And I picked up the first issue of the Warren Spirit magazine when I was a young boy. And, that character, Ebony White, who we're looking at right there, I did not think that was a human being. You know what I mean? Like, that is pretty awful that he did that, because as an artist, you can be critical of the times. Like, you don't have to do what everybody else is doing. You know what I mean? Like, that's a pretty poor excuse. And I really did not think, like, when I started to read these comics further, and there are several stories that come later where Ebony White and his friends are hanging out and stuff, and it blew my mind. Like, this is a person? Fucked up.
He talks about this coming out of pulps, kind of an alternative to superheroes in a way, and it got me thinking about, when it comes to like visual storytelling, this is probably some of the oldest stuff that I look at. It's not like I'm watching movies really from the 30s or 40s. So in a lot of ways, this is my glimpse of that era.
What's this documentary? Or
no, like
comics?
Spirit. Specifically,
yeah.
I'm talking about Spirit, because it's that urban setting, it's a city, it's fashion, like it's all the incidental stuff that you may not think about, but it's period specific if you were going to try to create a story from that era. But for, work from that time that I'm looking at, this is probably the primary source.
I love his like Brooklyn accent while he's reading these things, man. I could listen to these cartoonists to read their comics all day, man. How ironic that whenever I go to comics readings nowadays, I can't stand it for 2 seconds. The part where he's talking about dealing with writing and acting, that's something that he's very much criticized for nowadays, for being like overly melodramatic with his posing and pulling a lot from the stage. But what else was there to pull from then? That's the bougie Comics Journal people that shit all over Eisner.
Yeah, I thought about wrestling on the way over here to record, and they're just performers too, but it's the same kind of performance that's shit on and dismissed. I think there's a lot of that.
We just saw John Stanley, Little Lulu. We're looking at Carl Barks, Donald Duck. I'm saying the range of material that
Very
is in here
comprehensive.
and he interviewed Carl Barks. Didn't make the cut for the final director's cut or whatever. But Ron Mann said that Carl Barks talks like Donald Duck. I don't know what that means, but I'm gonna have to investigate YouTube later. Oh, here we go, man. This stuff gave me chills. The Tales from the Crypt TV show was out at this time, and I had copies of Tales from the Crypt and The Haunt of Fear that I was able to get at the grocery store at this very moment. I had Haunt of Fear 14 or 18 at my house, man, and was a devoted fan. I got to read these damn comics the same way a kid in the 50s was able to.
He talks about all the people that were coming at comics. I think we always think just crime comics are too violent or whatever, but there are things about reading. There are all these different groups that he cites as like all these forces converging on comics.
Down to the idea that the ink would bleed when it hits the page and just kind of like hurt kids' eyes.
Right, yeah, that's one of them, is like it's damaging their eyes because the print's so small. It's a litany of stuff against comics, and it's almost conspiratorial. Let
me tell you, man, when I watched the entire, that Confidential File show is like the connective tissue that this entire flick kind of, it's like bookended with this Confidential File thing, and I watched that entire episode. Just like in the 80s, whenever like steroids and wrestling were a thing, and people were wondering if wrestling was fake or not, and there would be like less successful wrestlers who would come out and talk smack on the business of wrestling. On that same program, there was a cartoonist. There was a cartoonist on there named Ellis Erringer, who was talking with our Paul Coates guy, and was just talking crap all over comics. I had lunch with Al Feldstein at the Pittsburgh Comic Con.
Holy cow!
Yeah, when he was a guest there, man. He was very, very old. We probably lost him a year or two later, but he was a really cool cat. He at the time he was into painting horses.
They talk process there, with Bill Gaines bringing in springboards.
I love that idea.
I do too. And one of Feldstein's examples is guy murders his wife and he eats her.
What they were talking about with the springboards and Bill Gaines and Al Feldstein, they would show up a lot in the comics. Like there would be like sort of parody strips in the science fiction comics and everything. And around this time, classic shot of the baseball head. Around this time, the episode of Tales from the Crypt would have been out where Harry Anderson is playing one of the pencilers in the EC bullpen who draws things that come to life, man. So to like see these guys in living color is just totally awesome.
I was aware, having come out of the service, that there was a great...
When he mentions knowing that Army guys were fans of comics, and it's funny that Feldstein is like one of the inventors of what they called headlight comics. Women with like very pointy brassieres. He knew his audience, man.
Yeah, for sure. That's amazing, that image. This made me think about how comics movies have worked. So like in the 50s you have these super violent graphic images, right? And you weren't seeing a severed arm in the middle of a subway car anywhere else. But you cut into like exploitation movies 20 years later, right, getting into the late 60s and 70s, and you see like the horror stuff that was in these comics in the 50s is now in low budget filmmaking, and it's on the silver screen. And then again, you cut like 20 years into that future, and now they're adapting the superhero stuff onto the screen. It's like the movie industry is like 20 years behind the comic book trends.
That's an interesting thing to point out. I read Seduction of the Innocent, and the examples that they give in there are just so bananas, man. It's an era before before Elvis and the Beatles came onto the scene. Parents had nothing to point at but themselves when it came to juvenile delinquency. But what was the closest scapegoat? Comics. And there it is, Confidential File. Total propaganda piece. The sophistication of like the regular audience for TV. I don't know that they would have fallen like. You can't fall for something this on the nose now, I don't think. I think everybody would, like, smell a rat. And it feels like a Saturday Night Live
because
thing.
I was sitting here thinking the exact opposite of, like, this is the beginning of media just trying to sell itself.
Right.
So you have to make something salacious. It seems ludicrous or quaint to us to think of comic books as being some force of evil. I mean, now they're celebrated as being, hey, whatever a kid will read, if it's a comic book, so be it. But everything is sort of this way. Like, very rarely are the storylines that are pushed forward in media actually indicative of what is the problem or the source of the problem or fixing the problem. And I think this is probably no different, you know, right? I mean, comic books weren't the reason for juvenile delinquency. Right. If so, whenever the 1950s happened and comics are restricted, then juvenile delinquency would have gone away, right?
When looking through Wortham's book, there's visual aids in there, and there's this one example where look,
that's a great cut.
That's a young Jim Rugg.
That really is. I carved up quite a few trees with my pocket knife as a boy, especially after I saw a comic book that had a knife in one of the panels.
And how about the way this Paul Coates guy, like what he talks about hanging out with his gang of friends when he was a kid? We roasted potatoes, like what a fucking square. we wrote nasty things about the teacher on the sidewalk. What a peckerwood.
That's a great look on
it's like Night of the Living Dead footage.
It is. It looked just like it.
So this little kid that Paul Coates is interviewing right here, little boy who says that he threw up, the comic that he's describing that he read that made him sick is the Jack Davis baseball severed head strip. And he sounds horrified. Like this kid is not joking. And then he used his leg for a baseball bat. And they used his insides for bases. And how about this Colonel Klink freaking Frederick Wortham impersonation, man?
All these pictures of the comics being thrown out or burned.
This is why those Golden Age comics are worth something nowadays, man, because your bored mom and dad, man,
a couple
were
of
burning
collectors
comics.
were behind the scenes flaming these.
You know, I always think about one of the greatest rewards for, I guess, bad behavior back in those old days was, imagine like all the DC comics that were telling kids to like recycle this at your nearest such and such, you know, like paper drives. And the people who didn't listen to Batman tell you that, like now their comics are worth tens of thousands of dollars.
This is amazing footage. So anybody that's watching this, I'm sure, knows comics history, and this is such a pivotal moment.
Yeah, Wortham, man, like abusing his 15 minutes of fame. And then, of course, this is the Kayfabe hearings, or however you say that senator dude's name. And Bill Gaines was there. We got a little footage of that. This is the only bit of it that I've ever seen, man. Like, it's clearly filmed. It's clearly shot. Like, it has to exist.
Yeah, you're right.
In total.
We should find this footage, because I'm sure you could get it through some public...
And they don't play the most important part, because, you know, Bill Gaines, he is on speed here to try to slim down, and they start to hit him with some questions about his aesthetic taste and his creative choices and stuff, because right here he sounds totally perfect and cogent. You know what I mean? Yeah, sure, like kids deserve to read, whatever, but. You know, I printed up a small excerpt of the Kayfabe hearings where the senator is saying, here in, Crime Suspense Stories 22, this seems to be a man with a bloody axe holding a woman's head up, which has been severed from her body. Do you think that this is in good taste? Bill Gaines says, yes, sir, I do, for the cover of a horror comic. A cover in bad taste, for example, might be defined as holding the head a little bit higher so that the neck could be seen dripping blood from it, and moving the body a little further over so that the neck can be seen to be bloody.
Look at the propaganda of the Comics Code, like on newsstands, to let consumers, parents, whoever know these are safe. You can buy these comics for your kids.
And of course, it was an initiative by all the other publishers to keep EC Comics from glomming onto their profits. Blackhawk. And then how heartbreaking is this, man? So I guess, is this guy like the leader of the Comics Code Authority? He talks like he is. And then how would you like to spend 200 man hours on a page to have your grandma fucking white out your stuff, man, only to put a little stamp on there?
It's infuriating.
Screws up your... Look, the composition just got screwed up. Screwed it up, man. And it's arbitrary. It's like you could have two guys getting blown up, floating in the sky, but do we need that third guy?
I've done reproductions or approximations of old pages, and we'll have that Comics Code stamp on them. This is a great story.
For a while, in the towards the end of the Comics Code Authority, there's an urban legend that the companies were paying their dues or whatever to the code to keep the stamp on their cover, and the envelopes were getting put into a mail slot and just piling up over years. The code was not in effect for years, and people were still kind of paying into it or whatever.
That's how everything works, though, right? I mean, it could go no other way.
And of course, the Comics Code Authority, the intellectual property of the little stamp and all that, is now owned by the Comic Book Legal Defense Fund, who's going to use their the money in their coffers to prevent another super conservative witch hunt on comics. Look at those Russ Cochran books, man. Just seeing those from this documentary, it's okay, I need those. But I'm really curious about the ones that are laying on top of the Tales from the Crypt. I don't know those books. I bet you they're Mad magazine hardcovers.
Yeah, it could be.
Reprinted collections of Mad.
Yeah, they could be anything. Foreign editions, office-bound copies.
So they put all the horror books and crime suspense stories out of business, and Bill Gaines has to then put out the new trend of piracy and psychoanalysis. What
is that?
Yeah, look at how the subliminal messaging of that. The Harvey Kurtzman section of the documentary. Kurtzman went to the High School of Music and Art in New York City. Mm-hmm. Some of his classmates, or people who were a couple years older or younger than him, Will Elder, L. Feldstein, Al Jaffe, and John Severin.
Wow.
I'm not sure. I think that school might be the Fame School, from the movie.
Kurtzman's great here in this documentary. We recently watched video of him with Stan Lee. I guess it would have been not that much after this, 4 or 5 years. And he just looks so sharp here.
Right at this time, he would have been working his butt off on Little Annie Fanny comics for Playboy magazine. One of my teachers at the Kubert School, my lettering teacher, is this guy named Phil Felix, who is the letterer on the Little Annie Fanny strips on Playboy. And Felix told me a story about how, even though it's Playboy and they're allowed to be a little bit more naughty and subversive, Kurtzman's humor was still very steeped in this old kind of mentality. So Felix was always encouraged to add jokes and things into the strips. And he did this one, he put this one joke in there where there's a scene inside of a bathroom, and there's the hand dryers, and there's a hand dryer that's in a normal position that says hand job, and then there was one that was in a lower position that said blow job. but Kurtzman axed that from the
all this Mad magazine coverage. It drives home to me how much those guys love the source material. the genres. You know, like it's very fan fiction-esque in a way. Like you could not produce that work if you weren't totally like in it. And you know, it swings both ways. There's stuff that you're in there that you hate because it's popular or the quality bothers you or whatever. But it's still this like fan fiction. You know, like it is this thing that you know inside and out in order to do this kind of parody.
You know, Kurtzman is associated with you know, like old Jewish comedy and Borscht Belt comedy and you know, Friars Club kind of stuff comes from that. And what they always say about roasts are, you know, you can only roast the ones you love, and that was mad. And you know what, like that was felt by the audience, man, because that magazine influenced an entire generation of people who we will be seeing.
Amazing design on these covers too. You know, it wasn't just the easy laugh or joke. Like, it was pushing the graphic side, too.
And then Kurtzman will take everything that they've been developing here, and when he leaves EC Comics, he'll bring all of that aesthetic stuff, including the border around that Alfred E. Newman, to his Humbug self-published effort.
That's a great one. I did what I wanted, so it came out all right.
This is the part where Evan Dorkin would be like, yeah, well, where's the original art at, Harvey? Carmine Infantino Flash, I believe. The new generation. So 20 years goes by, booming comic industry, at least 15. No real superhero stuff. The big ones continued to stagger along for a while. Look at that, Joe Kubert, Hawkman.
That's great. That reminds me of Kyle Baker's whenever he did those oversized DC newsprint strip. It really reminded me of that Kyle Baker, or the Joe Kubert art there.
I used to go around singing the song. It would be on these, like, when I worked in the video store, there were VHS collections of
I
all
always
these.
loved that Gene Colan Iron Man.
Yeah. There would be collections of the old VHS Marvel cartoons, and this theme song was on all of them at the beginning. Joe Sinnott's sharp inking.
You know, the other thing I took away watching this is the way he shoots all of the comic art. You know, these super close-ups of panels and figures, and you're seeing like the Ben-Day dots, you're seeing the printing errors, the tooth of the paper. This is stuff I would associate with Chip Kidd and that aesthetic. And also with blogs, like when blogs first started up and everybody was doing like, this is this panel from this great story, and in a weird way it would look better than the whole, you know, I'd track down the comic and it wouldn't look as good. There's a real start of that here.
Look at Stan Lee with his arms crossed in the b-boy stance, and he's wearing the exact same Kazali shades, man, that DMC would wear.
He's very cool. It seems like such a California coolness about him in this presentation.
Telling his classic story that he tells all the time about, you know, reinventing the superhero, not mentioning Jack Kirby or Steve Ditko anywhere in the mix.
Yeah, and keeping in mind that several of these cartoonists are being filmed for the first time for this documentary and respond accordingly. You know, it's a shy cartoonist in a room. Stan's been in front of a camera quite a bit.
So as a kid, I'm flipping through the stations, right, and I see this image of Spider-Man on the TV, and that was not something that you could take for granted in 1991.
Sure.
You know, I stopped dead in my tracks looking at this Spider-Man thing.
What a great design. Like, such a creepy, weird-looking design.
Yeah.
We take it for granted because Spider-Man's always been in our life, but man, that is a crazy design. The amount of dialogue in these panels, too. He's just reading this one panel.
Yeah. But he's also doing voices too, which I think is really good, man. Like I could listen to Stan Reed comics.
It's a great cut. You know, it's almost animation. He's just flipping from one panel to the next.
We might have to do some of this stuff on our own YouTube. But like, you know, I have some image strips that I did about Image Comics that like might work in like this video format.
But here you can see clearly those dots. You know, those printing dots. That again, like Chip Kidd, I think really popularized it, being able to scan your comics or photograph them with, you know, digital cameras. This is the norm now. Like, we all take it for granted this is what comics are made of. But what an effective presentation on television of this stuff.
If you see photographs of Stan Lee in the 50s, he has less hair than he does here, man. He's like William Shatner that way. Somehow it hits a growth spurt when you hit about 60. So as a little dude, I'm sitting here watching like, oh yeah, you know, Thor, Hulk, Spider-Man, I'm with it. Ant-Man sounds interesting. I don't know about that guy. Sounds interesting. And then it'll go directly into what it's going to go into. Blew my mind.
What you know about comics in this time period and creation, are you surprised by the way this part of the story is told by the documentary? Like, it's very much Stan Lee's point of view. And I mean, like, we've seen footage of Kirby. There's very alternative versions of this era and what happened here.
Right.
And it's an interesting documentary, but that one side seems very...
I was already indoctrinated because Stan Lee's voice would be on all the Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends and all that stuff, man. And I'm like, okay, yeah, he invented everything. I think it's Dennis Kitchen. If it's not Kim Deitch, it's Dennis Kitchen, that flower girl thing. Go right into frickin' Robert Crumb, man.
What a juxtaposition.
Blew my mind, dude.
Stan Lee to Robert Crumb. Like, that's the power of editing.
And once again, that Comics by Les Daniels book has such a healthy representation of this underground stuff, too. That's what I mean. Like, the book is such a perfect companion. And they're almost the complete, you know, Zap Comics 1 or Zap Comics 0 is printed in that book. I have to imagine that I got a funny feeling when I saw that one image. But this section here where he's talking about the evolution of Fritz the Cat just blew my mind, because we just saw a Fritz the Cat comic drawn with pencil on a piece of notebook paper. And I was already doing comics at that time, but I felt weird about it. Like, you know, I kept them very private. And to see that an actual adult, like a person who's in the game, started out that way, incredibly motivating to me, dude. And we're going minutes, like, without seeing him, seeing what Robert Crumb looks like. And then you see those eyes, man. Those are eyes that had access to that pharmaceutical grade LSD from the 50s, man.
Yeah, he tells, you know, those stories are pretty famous, some of the LSD in the Bay Area at this time, and even ideas that some of it was government influenced. This is a great story that he tells about how he goes from kind of a middle class art, you know, commercial art, doing cards, which a lot of artists used to do. That was big business for freelancers, and rejecting that.
Rejecting that, and also rejecting going to Marvel Comics to become a superhero artist. You know, the comics that he was reading when he was a kid is like Walt Kelly, Carl Barks, Jay Disbrow, like...
Mad Magazine would have been, you know, 10 years before this.
Of course. I was thinking about that just last night when putting together some notes for the commentary. The fact that the Undergrounds came out basically a decade after the Senate subcommittee hearings and all that kind of stuff. And that really speaks to me, too, because it's like, you know, Crumb is growing up when guys like Jack Davis and Ghastly Graham Ingalls are being raked over the coals for drawing these lurid stories and trying to, like, you know, upset children and all this kind of thing. So when they start this underground thing, it's like trolling, you know. And he says here, he's like, yeah, we had to, for us to explore the things we really wanted to explore, the first thing we had to do was destroy all taboos.
Yeah. Man, he also talks about those posters coming from Oakland, San Francisco Bay Area, and it was like the symbol. It was like the sign, like, this is where you got to go. I think that's pretty amazing to think about in the 60s. Like, he just meets some dudes that are going west and hops in a truck with them.
Victor Moscoso. Let me ask you this, Jimmy. We see Victor Moscoso and Crumb standing there. Does that look familiar to you?
Yeah, is that...
It was Last Gasp.
Yes, Last Gasp Warehouse.
Yeah,
right.
you and I were in that standing in that very spot a couple of years ago, man, when Ron Turner, the gatekeeper, the Grand Poobah of Last Gasp, I think they were moving the warehouse for the first time in a long time or something like that. We had a big party there, and then I think we snuck out to get a little bit of food, and then you and your gang split, and me and my gang were going to head back to the party, and the doors closed, and we were like, fuck, how the hell do we get back to our hotel? Like, now we have to, like, this is before Uber. And old man Ron Turner, man, showed up in his like soccer mom van and was like, "Hey boys, what are you doing?" And we were just like, "Hey, we have to go back to our hotel." And he's like, "Get in the car."
That had to freak out a young Ed Fisker.
So awesome. But you know what? When I was talking about the things that I saw out in the wild after seeing this documentary, that Stoned Again poster was in Spencer Gifts like the next weekend. Like, I saw that poster next to a Fabulous Furry Freak Brothers poster at Spencer Gifts. I want to see, like, there are bits of this Super 8 footage in the Crumb documentary. So once again, just like that Senate subcommittee stuff, I need to see this whole tape.
Yeah, for sure.
Like I need to see.
He does that that fall.
Oh yeah.
It's incredible.
And they are working on a jam strip, and clearly you could see they're rock stars. But I was doing some digging in my old Complete Crumb comics to try to identify the exact strip that the guys are drawing here, and I found it. It was so this video was probably taken in 1970.
They're so small. The what they're drawing is so small.
Totally. And using very weird looking tech pens of the day. I always thought rapidographs looked like rapidographs. But the strip was printed in an issue of the East Village Other. It's called Science Fiction Comics. It's a jam strip, obviously. Like, they're each just drawing a panel. Look at that, Robert Williams. Mm-hmm. And it was published in Volume 6, Number 1, East Village Other, December 12th, 1970. You can find the complete strip in Volume 7 of the Complete Crumb Comics, page number 41.
Nice pull. Whenever they're sitting there drawing, at one point they show Robert Crumb's head on his hand being propped up, so he's like 4 inches or something, his eyes, from the actual art that he's drawing.
Your eyes and your posture can't maintain, like, Crumb looks and he stands the way he does for a reason.
Yeah, that's a guy that draws all the time and has been forever. I
often think that like his blurry vision probably helps a lot with the cross hatching, and I'm just from my own experience and being pretty blind myself. Like, it's very easy for me to soften the focus of my eyes so that the gray just blends into a very... And his vision is worse than mine. That's a Robert Williams. Before Robert Williams hooked up with the Zap crew, he was doing artwork for Big Daddy Roth and Ratfink and that whole hot rod car movement. There's a panel from the Joe Blow comic strip from Zap Comics number 4 that got pulled from many racks due to obscenity charges because of incestuous orgy sequence.
That looked like the Tribe inside cover of Tribe number 1.
Yeah. Stroman and Crumb could probably we could probably do an hour with those guys on Kayfabe in the future, just talking about butts.
It just seems like some of that put on this path, early in life, and I can't.
The discerning viewer will recognize that the studio configuration that Crumb's sitting in is very similar to the studio configuration that he kept while the Crumb documentary was being filmed. I believe he said that some of the earliest parts of the Crumb documentary were even being filmed back then when Ron Mann was making his flick. Now we have Spain Rodriguez. Whenever I read early things about Spain, like old articles, interviews and stuff, people would always associate him, even in that comics led by Les Daniels book, they call his work Kirby-esque, and I don't see it. I just feel like maybe they just don't have much vocabulary to.
That looks like it.
Yeah, I know. As soon as I say it, like that image comes up, and it's like, okay, yeah. But by and large, man, I don't see, like, I mean, if that's Spain right there, this policeman,
right?
There's nothing Kirby about that. The strip that they're showing off, though, man, I love this thing, and I own basically every comic that is being talked about in this documentary, but I've never seen this strip. So any of the Kayfabers out there in the comments, let me know where I can get my hands on this comic with Trash Man about to shoot up the Democratic National Convention dinner or whatever the heck we're looking at here.
I think that's in that original Trash Man tabloid.
I don't know it.
Oh man, I'll have to send you some pictures of it. You'll like it a lot. Because he did a Trash Man that was on tabloid newsprint, like oversized.
Yeah, I've never seen that. Look at that, man, loading on the offset print machine. From
Wonder Warthog.
I believe Gilbert Shelton ran the press from his house before they had an actual facility to do this. So this image right here, the fabulous Furry Freak Brothers, another poster that was at Spencer's Gifts at the same time that this was on television.
The rigor of his drawing always astounds me.
Yeah, like Crumb would have this this like shaky crosshatch, and what we're seeing on screen is actually not the most rigorous example of Gilbert Shelton. This is still old material, but just as he grew older and continued throughout the years and just gained more and more drawing skill, like the crosshatch, it was totally insane.
He was one of the alternative underground guys that I first gravitated towards because of that level of line work.
Good pacing to this program as well, because you think about Gilbert Shelton and Robert Crumb both did work in Help magazine under the tutelage of the editor Harvey Kurtzman. You know, so they grew up influenced by Harvey's Mad comics, and 5-10 years later, Harvey Kurtzman's over there with James Warren doing Help magazine, and they had some of their earliest comics work published in there.
That's just an amazing drawing. Like, there's foreshortening and everything in that.
Shelton has a great voice for, like, cartoons.
Yeah, he does. He sounds like a voiceover guy.
The end.
Incredible.
Yeah, man. These old undergrounds, man, every single one of them had work from cartoonists that you've never heard of before or since. Is that Rory Hayes right there?
I don't think so.
No, not Rory Hayes, but Greg Irons. Justin Green, Binky Brown.
One of the early artist edition reprints.
Totally. And then you have like Will Eisner doing this snarf thing, Trina Robbins, It Ain't Me Babe. But you have Will Eisner doing that snarf thing, and then you have Harvey Kurtzman hanging out with those dudes while they're doing jam strips, and you could just like tell that it's like, here's the old dudes that are trying to like hang out with like some young hip kids and maybe get a young girlfriend.
Kurtzman would have been hanging out with underground dudes on a weekend, right? And then going back to SVA with Will Eisner during the week. Like, it's a lot of range. I've never read the Air Pirates.
I believe it has to be public domain now. So the images it's all online, and there will be links in the show notes so that you could check it out. But like the Air Pirates is a collective. So Dan O'Neill, he did this strip called Odd Bodkins, and it was in the San Francisco Chronicle. He started it in 1964, and talk about the paranoia of like weed and shit like that, like smoking marijuana. He like left and came back a bunch of times, and ultimately he started to get paranoid that the newspaper was going to kick him off and then get somebody else to like draw Odd Bodkins. So what he decided to do was to start to incorporate Disney characters into the strip, and he used dozens of their characters. Now this is before Air Pirates, by the way, and ultimately, because what his idea was that because he did not own the copyright, it was the newspaper, so he wanted to get them involved in a copyright infringement case with Disney. Didn't happen. But he got fired, and he got to keep the rights to his Odd Bodkins. Then he put together, this collective of cartoonists: Bobby London, Sherry Flanagan, Gary Halgren, Ted Richards. Each of these cartoonists kind of embodied the work of earlier comic strip artists. So, like, Sherry Flanagan, she was drawing like a mix between like Winsor McKay, Claire Briggs, H.T. Webster. Halgren was like Polly and Her Pals kind of artwork. Bobby London did Dirty Duck, and his art was kind of crazy cat-ish. And Bobby London, after Air Pirates, would go on to helm the creative duties on the Popeye comic strip. Dirty Duck appeared a lot in Playboy magazine, even is into the 90s. I remember seeing it. And then that Ted Richards guy had like a sad sack Beetle Bailey kind of style. So all these guys, like, they had reverence for,
Sure.
you know, the stuff that they were covering, and you know, they took it to this place.
That's an amazing idea. Like, I think this is such a strange piece of interview footage to me, because he talks about this court case with Disney fighting to say that is Mickey Mouse. It's so bizarre.
Well, just way different times, man. Like, thanks to the internet, like, a lot of people throwing their hands up and just like,
Yes.
and just like, okay, it has to live. Like, you know, in internet speak, there's a term called Rule 34. Do you know Rule 34,
No.
Jim? So Rule 34 is there is pornography of anything that you can imagine. You know what I'm saying? And so if you type in Mickey Mouse Rule 34, you're going to find 10,000 naked Mickey Mouse, you know, sex drawings probably. And what's Disney going to do? You know what I mean? Sue everybody? I want to put a call out to comics publishers, man. We need a collected Trotz and Bonnie already, man. I read Sherry Flanagan's Trotz and Bonnie in National Lampoon. In even like the later years, like whenever National Lampoon sucked, but like they would still get some interesting cartoonists here and there. And her stuff was formatted like a little Nemo strip with, like, you know, numbered panels, soft edges at the corner and everything like that, man. Her cartooning is just sublime. Plus, she's like really hardcore, man. Like, so it's just like, she describes it, it's like cute imagery, but then, you know, talking about some wild stuff, man. I think the Air Pirates had like a compound that they all lived in. And she, for a very brief time, was married to that Bobby London guy. But I wonder what she's been up to. You know, she's like one of those early, like, badass National Lampoon cartoonists that in the same breath as like M.K. Brown. Or like even, I think Mimi Pond even was like a part of the, not Air Pirates, but like part of that early National Lampoon crew. You hear guys like Mike Judge talk about these ladies as being like tremendous influence on his work.
This is an amazing strip.
Isn't I know. And I love that our demented laugh is going to be on that track just before this little dude meets his retribution.
Very attractive cartooning.
Perfectly spotted blacks, you know, and good, like, different kinds of gray values all over the place. Simple, expressive faces.
Yeah, I'm sure some of it's careful curation, but the chops of the artists that they've showcased are extraordinary when you think of everything that we see in comics is not quite up to that level.
No, that's for sure. But like, everything that we see, it is such a wide range too. It's probably the widest range of comics that existed at this time. Like, I don't know how much further you could have taken it. I think that there's like some Blu-ray, you know, updated Comic Confidential thing that has some extra interviews and stuff. And I think, you know, Bill Sienkiewicz was a part of that. Whenever Bill Griffith came to Pittsburgh for Pix, I brought this up because obviously this is like well, that's not true, because the Zippy the Pinhead comic strip was in the Pittsburgh press back then. So I knew the strip, had no idea that it came from Underground Comics, but I got to ask him about this, and he was like so weirded out by the idea that they wanted to do this thing. But I don't think, like, getting a chance to hang out with him and spend time with him on this documentary and on the Crumb documentary, he doesn't come off very well. Like I think he's very nervous on camera or something like that, because he is far more talkative. Like the stuff he's almost doing shtick here to me, you know, speaking in non sequitur and stuff like that, and it's actually a little bit of a put off. But he's not this guy that we're watching, you know what I mean? Like, he's way more lucid, because like this young Griffey is not like a lucid character.
Do Do you think that's intentional here, or do you think that's being on camera without a lot of experience being on camera?
I think it's both, probably. I think he's trying to trying to sell a thing, but I think he's also just not pulling it off because he's too nervous. Like, he's not committing. You know what I mean? He's not committing to the weird shit that he's trying to do, so it just comes off very stilted.
If this is your comic, I'm sure the expectations for you, the person, are pretty weighted. You know what I mean? Like,
Sure.
it's bizarre. Like, it defies description in a lot of ways, and now you're sitting in front of a camera being asked to describe it.
Once again, the pacing of this is perfect, too, because it was Bill Griffith and Art Spiegelman. You know, Bill Griffith was on, like, the West Coast. Spiegelman was on the East. And they were both the editors-in-chief of Arcade magazine, the very short-lived anthology that preceded Raw.
I feel like that's an underrated anthology. Because it comes between, like, the underground, you know, Zap or something, and then Raw, as you mentioned. But that's a great anthology.
I was thinking we should have talked about that on the Palmer's Picks, where we were talking about underground anthologies. That Zippy guy is so disturbing. That'll haunt your goddamn dreams.
And look at it and tell you what's going on. It's a dirty job. But
Something.
somebody has to.
Silver Snail.
I think this store is still open in Toronto.
I think I saw a mention of it, like in the chat room comments. We have a couple Toronto Kayfabers out there. Cody Starbuck, Howard Chaykin, Howie Chaykin. What is that guy's name? Mike Friedrich?
I always get Mike and Gary confused.
So
and I
do
don't
I.
think they're any relation.
This puts a good timestamp on it. Destroyer Duck was out. Steve Gerber and Jack Kirby.
Destroyer Duck is early 80s, right? Cerebus is late 70s. Starreach mid 70s.
Yeah, and that Elf Quest was late 70s as well.
So they're basically describing the rise of the direct market there. And which comic book stores, for, you know, I guess lack of a better term.
Treasury editions.
Watching this, I kept thinking about crossovers and how, like, it's a sign of struggle, right? Whenever, when the competitors band together, I feel like that's an indication that maybe the industry is
Trying to get some cash infusion by getting some national press. Oh, this is Harvey Picar talking, man.
They're not making up stories out of whole cloth.
Harv, my man. That dude saved my life, dude.
Actually seen and experienced.
It is nice to contextualize these. So this is like second wave of underground alternative comics.
Whenever this came out, the American Splendor collection with the Drew Friedman cover was out in like Walden Books and shit like that. I remember seeing it, and even this young, the parts of the Marvel comics that I was reading, I was way more interested in like the Peter Parker parts.
Yeah.
And when I saw that American Splendor collection, it's like, okay, it's a comic book full of the Peter Parker parts. You know what I'm saying, man? Super important to me. I'm trying to filibuster and not listen to him too much, man, because I don't feel like crying in front of you, man. I spoke with this guy on the phone whenever I was working with him for 2.5 years, sometimes for hours, and he would call up and just talk to my dad about football and junk like that. Like this dude helped me escape poverty, man, by, you know, giving me a chance. You know, I'm forever grateful, man. And when Robert Crumb was working at American Greetings was in Cleveland, so he knew Harvey Picar. They were pals there in Cleveland.
Through the music. Their mutual love of music. In music collecting?
Yeah, record collecting and trading. And it was Crumb who put the battery in Harv's back, man. And, told him to kind of get busy. Like, P-Car was inspired by the stuff Crumb was doing, jotted down some quick scripts, and Crumb read them and was like, yeah, man, let me illustrate a couple of these things.
Such a ridiculous story.
And Harv, I love you, but the strip is about him stopping his record collecting. And I've been to the man's house. Now he at the time he upgraded to CD, but I think I saw 5,000-6,000. Put it this way: the entire hallway of the upstairs was CDs, from floor to ceiling on a racked out went like that,
Great
like
silhouette.
to the point where I don't know how he was ever going to grab the ones at the top. So
That collector thing is just it's a thing you're born, like, you have, it's a condition almost.
He had a heck of a library too, man. Like he had these bookshelves like you see here, and they were back to back, like in a library, and like with 2.5 feet of space in between.
Amazing personality too, beyond the comics. Like having a life on, as a Letterman character, essentially.
You know what's crazy is, like, of course, yeah, he was on Letterman, and he's
another interesting guy to do the compare and contrast with Stan Lee. The very smooth in front of the camera, but also a character,
Right. Linda Berry was on Letterman, too. Young Jaime. I feel like you should be able to donate your car to the Billy Ireland Cartoon Art Library for the amount of important and great cartoonists who got to ride shotgun in your car. Jaime being one of them. Steranko.
What about that priest you told me about that used to buy you things when you were little, going to that Catholic school? Brother Boris?
I remember seeing this for the first time and thinking that the images were about as big as that, a piece of paper, and thinking that it looked like coloring books. I'm like, oh, that looks like coloring books. Not realizing that those panels are about the size of 4 postage stamps, stacked together. But Jaime told us a story once, man, about Comic Confidential and the part where he's sitting there drawing, and he said that Gilbert is kind of to the side, and keeps making fun of the way he's drawing boots and cars, and just totally fucking with him, fucking with his little brother. I love that lack of holding line.
Yeah.
Just have the line for the shadow underneath the nose. And Jaime, he went to a community college or something for a semester or some shit when he got out of high school. And he says that the art teachers there are these classically trained. He learned so much.
Really?
From these they were grizzled vets, these old timers who he cites as being incredibly important for the growth of his art. Yeah, that car, Gilbert's over to the side, you call that thing a car?
I'm so impressed by those drawings, because anytime you're drawing with a marker or something on an easel, it's all unnatural, and you're trying to work as fast as you can because you're in front of some sort of an audience. I feel like that stuff reads pretty well.
Speedy's still alive. He doesn't know the fate that's going to come.
I love that panel.
Me too. And when he says it looks like chalupas, and then the other guy's like, chalupa chicharrones. It would be 10 years after this that the chalupa comes to Taco Bell. And when I saw that word again, because this was my only context, and every time I would see it, probably even still to this day, I think, chalupa chicharrones. Oh, young Jaime, man. He's the most gracious guy, because he talks to me like I'm a peer, and I'm like, I know I'm not, dude. You're just being nice.
4 different books, and the first one that I did is called Girls and Boys, and
Linda Berry.
it's mostly about the joys of relationships.
One of the early
and Harry men.
alt weekly comic strip cartoonists, man. Ernie Pook's Comique, alongside Charles Burns with his Big Baby strip, and Matt Groening's Life in Hell. I think her first Ernie collection was published by Matt Groening. This is way before any kind of Drawn and Quarterly or anything. I'm talking late 70s.
Man, she's incredible. Anybody watching this ever has a chance to see her in any capacity, speaking, a panel, whatever. She's amazing.
Yeah, probably like you, man. She teaches classes from what I understand. So it's like she has that skill set of being able to kind of like command a room and keep people engaged.
She strikes me as almost like a genius quality, where like she just sees things differently than everyone else. Like one of the things she was doing in school, because she teaches at higher ed, she was doing these programs where she would put together scientists and kids to draw, and then like comparing their drawing styles, and they were identical because it has something to do with like visually trying to represent an idea. So it wasn't art as much as it was just like, there's this thing in my brain and now I'm trying to put it on paper for a record to organize this. Very similar, and it's interesting, man. Like anything she does, I feel like is worth time.
I remember seeing her speak just about comics in general, not even specifically her own stuff. But she's talking about her love. Like she hates, there's this like fashionable trend of like hating on this comic or that comic, and she adores Family Circus. Did you ever see this thing? And she I guess she had traumatic upbringing in some extent. Maybe I'm wrong, but she just described something that didn't seem very happy when she was a kid, and she described the Family Circus, especially the circular nature of the panel, as being like a portal into like a world of like a happy family where siblings got along and stuff like that. And when she was talking about it, she actually broke down a little bit.
Yeah.
Like so she wasn't playing.
It's funny to hear you describing it and then see those pictures of the very unhappy faces.
Here we go, man. Gummo Bubbleman. If you ever read Dan Pussy. Whenever we were showing off Raw Magazine on the live stream, people in the chat room were like, "Oh, that's the thing that Klaus was talking about in Dan Pussy." Yeah, it exists. Spiegelman, he was teaching at SVA at this time too, and you know what his regular day job was at this time. You know why he's Gummo Bubbleman? Because he worked at Topps. He is cited as being there's a lot of controversy around it, but he is cited as being a creator of Garbage Pail Kids. Mark Newgarden sort of takes that credit as well. Mark Newgarden would have been his student. Mark Newgarden was, in the class with Kaz and Friedman.
Francois is really great on this documentary too, and tells one of my favorite stories I've ever heard in my life. Raw is such an incredible book and remains incredible now. Like there have been, I've seen articles where they show the sketchbooks, like the production books that she and Spiegelman would put together as like mock-ups and trying to map out, how do we do this? What is the theme? Graphically. All that material I just think is incredible, and I think she's responsible for a lot of that, like the design and production stuff. I think she is.
Oh, absolutely. There is a reason why she gets to be the art director of New Yorker magazine. And just for some trivial side note, man, her humble beginnings sort of began as a colorist on Masters of Kung Fu. It may or may not have been the David Mazzucchelli issue. Jerry Moriarty. That's been reprinted recently, thankfully, because you are not finding that book cheap. I'm eating all this stuff up. Red, yellow, blue plate, black, four color, all in color for a dime. Like, I'm making all these connections.
This is one of those great stories talking about their production, and it's like, it's this meticulous production with super cheap materials, and the printer's just confused.
And dude, we both experience that. I'm sure you experience that with Aphrodisiac, but like, with the weird printing and the weird sort of setup with the Hip Hop Family Tree books, and even my X-Men stuff, we get notes back from the printer. Hey, this black line's a little light, and it's like, it's supposed to be that way. Don't you dare touch a goddamn thing. I'll be like Chris Ware and I'll fly to China.
Yeah, I've gotten phone calls from like, wherever we're printing this stuff, and it's like, the registration's off.
Paul Karasik expanded on the story she tells here when I was asking about his days at Raw. The cover that they all were kind of tearing up and re-stitching back so that every single issue was a little bit different. He said that there was like this like anthropological thing that was happening while they were at the party smoking weed doing this shit, where it turned out that like just very naturally all the guys were tearing the magazines up and destroying them, and it was like the women on the scene who were like mending fences.
Yeah. This is that great story. The printer just is beside himself.
I think she had like first off, look at how cool their setup is. That's the other thing that I made note of like at the very beginning of this flick. Like, yo, I want all the stuff that Paul Mavrides dude has. Like, I look at this and it's like I want those flat files, I want those racks. Like, it's like I'm unconscious incompetence as a little kid. I don't know anything, but like when I saw all this, it's like, okay, I need that.
I wonder if that was like real estate was cheap back then. You know, that they could afford like these big production spaces in New York. This is another one. This is just production porn.
Totally.
Sorry, I'll put that away. Forgot where I was at for a minute.
Wow, man. And then, you know, just another clue into like how comics were being made. You know, like it's all on one sheet, and then, you know, you fold it over a couple times. You cut it and staple it.
How great is that? We're doing our light meter read. Also, he has that pose on the chair, and I was trying to figure that part out, where he's like perfectly framed in black with that setting around it.
Yeah, Charles Burns. He looks younger now than he does back then. How does that happen? You know how that happens, man? When you're balding, just shave it all off. I think that's the move, man. This highly disturbed me, like his reading of this, because it's like, okay, you call this comic Big Baby, that kid looks like Professor X, like, and he looks even taller than everybody else in the thing. He looks challenged, we'll say.
Yes.
Like, what is this freaking thing? And then you see this guy, bananas, what else would have been on TV at this very time that I saw this documentary was Liquid Television, and Liquid Television did they adapted the Dog Boy comic strip that Charles Burns did on a weekly basis. So I saw Charles Burns' name in the credits in the back, and then like when I watched Dog Boy, because it's highly visual, you know, everybody's wearing plastic hair, and there are people who look like this, you know what I mean? Like the plastic hair is in the same shape as the characters that he's drawing, so it made that direct correlation really quick.
The generic horror story that came out of EC Comics, werewolves.
Just from a filmmaking perspective, it's really great to get that full circle of like the EC Comics reference here again.
To have a more personal.
I embarrassed him really bad at the Miami Book Festival because I think I pointed out, I think I put my finger on like a certain like obsessive compulsive thing that he did that he just kind of took for granted as like, yeah, it was outed basically. Maybe he just, you know, didn't want to put it out there or whatever. But anyhow, in that book, X'd Out, there's a part where the character wakes up and he's in his like loft bed, and there's a brick wall that's like facing the bed. So the character wakes up and there's a hole in the brick wall, and you see that hole in the brick wall in like 3 or 4, maybe 5 different camera angles, right? 5 different shots. If you count up, the same amount of bricks are always there on the wall. Like, it's always accurate. The bricks that are jutting out are always accurate, and there's like little bits of like brick dust like on other bricks, and he draws that in there at like 5 different camera angles, 5 different perspectives. And I told him, like, yeah, man, that's not lost on me, dude. Like, I appreciate that you would do something like that. He turned beet red after I said that, and he's like, well, you only have one chance to get things right, he said.
Wow.
But it embarrassed him, and I thought I was just totally paying him a compliment for like being thorough with his production.
Yeah. He must be so obsessive in real life. You know, like you see the art, you can make assumptions, right? This is a guy that's getting every detail perfect. For him to be like self-conscious of you calling that out, like he must get it about from civilians.
You call me a civilian, Jim? I'm about to shut off this recording. Next comes Suko.
I wish there was another documentary that was on each one of the features that we've seen like 10 minutes of. Because like Raw, I could watch 2 hours of this stuff.
Absolutely. And Suko, somebody that I'm very curious about, because I just simply don't know much about her.
Yeah, not that, I'm curious how she got into comics and out of it, because her career as an artist is much bigger outside of comics, obviously. Probably some crossover in New York. She describes, like she talks about propaganda and her work being propaganda and propaganda being through all the media. I kind of love that perspective.
She is like, I mean, I wonder if she's saying this ahead of the curve, but one of the big criticisms of her work, like from big time artsy fartsy art critics, is that she is like, in pro wrestling parlance, going for the cheap pop with her artwork. So I wonder if she's like trying to cut it off at the pass, try to steal the thunder of those critics, or if this is her saying this in response to a lot of the criticism that she's received over the years.
It feels like chicken and egg, because artists are forced to talk about their work, especially at this era. You're writing artist statements, you're being interviewed for documentary films, and you're seeing that criticism. If you're showing your art and it's being seen and it's important, you're getting those criticisms leveled at you and being asked about them. So I'm sure that's an ongoing evolution. But that is propaganda, like using that low common denominator, being sensational in your imagery and message, all propaganda.
And look at this; it's like proper bookstore. I think that's what they're communicating. Like, and then here's like the little piddly comic section, and then Jules Pfeiffer Fantagraphics reprint, I think.
Kurtzman, Crazy Cat.
Ron Mann, the filmmaker, said that the first interview that he conducted was with Jules Pfeiffer. Didn't make it in the film, but somehow by doing that interview, he was able to get a lot of seed capital for the feature film. Back with Spiegelman.
Man, I'd be curious to see that Jules Pfeiffer stuff.
I wonder if it's on the Blu-ray. Any of the Kayfabers out there who have the Comic Book Confidential Blu-ray, put something in the comments and let us know what kind of stuff we can expect on there. Like, I don't even have a Blu-ray player, but if it's enticing, I will buy a Blu-ray player just for this.
That breakdown panel I loved, and like I have breakdowns, and I it's so different to see it like on a page with 14 other panels. I wonder how much of this was early in Ron Mann, like figuring out this movie was like looking at single panels, looking at them big on a screen, because there's so much power in how he's presenting this stuff. It's almost like changing the context for comics, this documentary.
So I see this documentary, and that same year in grade school, either 4th or 5th grade, those little like tracing paper feeling scholastic things that they would pass out on homeroom, where you check off the box and get your mom to write a check for $15 or for a couple of books. Like, of course, every time they would pass those out, I would get some books. And after I saw this documentary, Mouse was in the scholastic, reading is fundamental, whatever those things are that you got in homeroom class, man. So you have the Pantheon, like, see, you have more street cred because your mouse is the Pantheon mouse, but mine is Scholastic mouse.
What's your impression of Mouse with like Cartoonist?
There is a certain critical mass, like when a book hits a certain threshold, people talk shit.
Okay.
And it happens with Spiegelman, happens with Neil Gaiman, happens with Jeff Smith. So my goal as a cartoonist is to hit those numbers and have these douchebags talk shit on me, man, because it's like, clearly these guys are doing something right, and they're not voicing the fact that they are jealous, but that's the only way I read it, man, because I just ignore stuff that I don't like, man.
I think it's so successful visually, and whenever I've heard people be critical of that part, I can never totally understand the criticism.
Frank the Tank.
I don't think this is necessary. I don't think it holds.
Whenever you watch this in high def, like, see, I just remember this from the TV, but when you watch, like, the Blu-ray, you could see, like, the smoke wafting here from his cigarette or whatever.
You know, 5 decades of time.
How old is he there?
Adapted.
29?
He was a
28?
young man. You know, he was a young man when he got into the game, very early 20s. And I think Ron Mann says that Dark Knight is kind of still underway. Dark Knight is not complete when they are talking with one another here.
Boy, it looks good on screen, too. I love the way they cut together, like, the television screens.
With Batman, you've got a character you can describe in just a few seconds. Parents were murdered by criminals. He's warring on.
For everything I said about, like, the limited animation and the fun watercolor on some of the earlier images, that background is whack.
It's real bad. I can't figure that out.
Like, at first I was like, when I was young, I was thinking like, oh man, maybe Frank Miller is like a method cartoonist. Like he's now working
hanging
on
around his studio.
Yeah, like he's now. I thought it was just straight up the wall. Like, okay, he's working on Batman for a year, so he's just going to paint, like, you know, a 4th grader Batman mural on the wall of his studio.
Because people started thinking the comics had to be just for kids.
Charles Burns is like an evolution of like a Dick Sprang, Charles Paris.
Yeah, Charles Paris, I was going to say, like, that's the inker that I think of with him.
What I've been trying to do recently is to take.
What's crazy now is that Frank Miller looks like Will Eisner from this documentary. Nowadays, man.
That's a pretty neat effect.
It is, and it works, like, to the viewer. It works almost like Clockwork Orange.
Yes.
Like you know, like you're just getting all this stuff, and it's like, oh.
It's incredible to me how well this stuff cuts. You know, it's so cinematic, and I know a lot of cartoonists are influenced by movie tropes, but seeing it actually cut this way, it's pretty wild.
America, which is a very frightening, silly place. It's often silly and frightening at the same time, and I hope Dark Knight is often silly and frightening at the same time.
Frank is deep. Look at that gaze. I love that panel, like where Batman is throwing that smoke grenade, because that's like, I did this before I hooked up with Boing Boing for my comic strips. I did this like essay about cause and effect in comic panels, and
I remember that.
I was just showing these examples where there's like a passage of time throughout the whole strip that like you know, the single image might be 30 seconds of time, and that was one of the panels that I cited. Ooh, I saw the original. My man Benno owns that splash page with Dark Knight, with Batman on the horse, man. Pete Bagg, neat stuff. Sergio Aragone, screw. Commies from Mars, I don't know, but I'm curious. Prime Cuts, Fantagraphics Anthology.
Shatter in the back corner. First computer comics.
Times Square, or as I called it, Time 2 when I was this age. Dean Motter, Paul Ricochet.
Referring to it as Time 2 whenever you met.
Yeah, well, like when we had dinner with Chaykin. Howard, I love your work, man. Time 2 is my favorite. And we got to say that to him, and he was like, yeah, you wouldn't be the only one. The only difference is you would have been 8 years old, and it's, 35-year-old guys saying that to me.
The size that I was working in a permanent art form, I felt it was going to be here someday.
Heck of a documentary, man.
Yeah.
Let me ask you, does, after watching it, I guess, you watch it 2 times in 2 days. I don't know about you, man, but it puts the battery in my back to get back to the drawing board and make some comics.
Yeah, for sure. That's what I'm going to do tonight.
Let's close out this recording and get the hell out of here.
Yeah, another good session. Hope the Kayfabers enjoy this commentary. If they do, I'm sure we'll find other stuff to weigh in on.
Yeah, we're like Howard Cosell. Yeah. In pro wrestling parlance, I would say that you are like the Gordon Soley, or like the Lance Russell of the tandem, and I think I'm probably closest to like
Jerry the King Lawler.
I wish. like I was going to say that little douchebag guy from the ECW stuff with the glasses that would yell and scream. Like that's probably as good as my contribution is to the gimmick. So guys, like the video, share it, subscribe, tell your friends. Social media platforms, everywhere that matters, man. All the links are in the show notes below, in the description below. Peace.
Yeah, and if you haven't seen Comics Confidential, this is the perfect excuse.